Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to tell you about a podcast that I love and that I think can help us understand this moment in abortion care. Hosted by Dahlia Lithwick, Slate's Amicus podcast is all about the Supreme Court and the law, but you don't have to be a constitutional lawyer to listen to it. And actually, last week, I had the pleasure of talking with Dahlia as a guest on the show. Here's Dahlia.
Thanks, Allie. On Amicus, we have this basic guiding principle that knowledge is power, and that even, or perhaps especially, an opaque and lofty institution like the U.S. Supreme Court could do with more people understanding where its decisions come from and what those decisions can mean for the rest of us, the American public. Because as the 6-3 supermajority conservative court has shown, those decisions reach into every single corner of our lives, and they reach ever further into the lives of healthcare workers. So find us on Saturdays wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's Amicus, that's A-M-I-C-U-S, from the Latin, your friend, with me, Dahlia Lithwick, looking forward to talking to you.
At the Nocturnists, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
Welcome back to the Nocturnists, Post-Roe America. I'm Dr. Allie Block. This week, we're looking at a very specific corner of the abortion world. It's an issue we've heard about over and over again as one of the most important impacts of the Dobbs decision, but it's also been one of the least covered. So today we're diving into medical training and education. Training to be an abortion provider has never been like training for any other medical specialty. It's rarely covered in med school, and only certain residency programs even offer abortion training at all. When I was in residency, even in an unrestricted state with a strong abortion care program, I still did an elective in Mexico City, simply to get the practice I felt I needed to be trained to competence. And this is common for many abortion providers, to travel out of state or even out of the country to get this basic skill set. The Dobbs decision has only further limited training opportunities. And when we're talking about medical education, we're also talking about the type of care an entire generation of clinicians will be able to provide. So to start today's episode, we asked one of my mentors to give us a crash course on what you need to know if you're learning how to do an abortion.
So, okay, the vagina is a dark canal. At the end of the dark canal, there's like the cervix that's a little donut, and it's a donut that is very tightly closed. That donut, it's made by a muscle, and it has a canal, right, that's going from there up into the uterus where the fetus is.
She wanted to stay anonymous, so we'll call her Julie. As someone who has spent years teaching others this procedure, Julie really impressed upon us the importance of hands-on practice.
And in order to get into the uterus, to empty it, you got to be able to find your way through that twisty canal. And you can't see it. It's a total feel thing. You got to feel, you got to know like how much pressure to put. Am I putting enough pressure? Am I putting too much pressure? Because you can create a false passageway. You can like force a really sharp instrument to go into the muscle. We call it a gritty feeling that you have when you're making a false passage. And you need to know that and back off and try something different and get into that uterus in the right way. And then, of course, the other risk with any time you're putting something into the uterus is that you go through the uterus. So you go into the uterus and then out the back into the abdominal cavity. And so that's making what we call a perforation, a hole in the uterus. And then that can cause damage to the bowels and bleeding. And, you know, perforations can cause hysterectomies and loss of life. Everybody is different. The body does not read the anatomical textbooks.
I think it can be helpful to compare performing an abortion to something like administering anesthesia or flying an airplane. It's mostly routine, straightforward, even rote. But like anything in medicine, there can be complications. They're rare, but when they do happen, they happen fast and can be life-threatening. The ramifications of losing out on this hands-on training extend beyond just abortion care.
The thing about abortion is that it's a really good practice for doing things that you need to be able to do to take good care of women who are having miscarriages or want IUDs or any of the things where you need to pass an instrument through the cervix. And it's terrifying for me to know that there's a generation getting trained in whole states where they're not learning these things in a way that they're going to be able to be competent.
6 hours after the Dobbs decision came down, I get a phone call that's like, the judge rules and the 6-week ban is in effect. You know, one moment we could do one thing and then the next moment, that's it.
This is Meredith, an OBGYN and educator in Cincinnati, Ohio. After the state enacted its 6-week ban in June of 2022, it became essentially impossible for her to teach abortion in any kind of hands-on way.
I think the hardest part for me was in July when I had to send an email to all the fourth-year medical students that were so excited about their elective and be like, hey guys, I don't know what your elective is going to look like, right? It's supposed to be a very hands-on elective. And as of now, it's going to be virtual online learning. It's so hard, and it's so hard to explain to other people why then residents might not want to come to states like Ohio. If they can't learn the skills, and they can go to New York or California and learn the skills and learn everything else that they would learn here, right? We're not adding anything extra. And so it puts you in a hard place as an educator because you're like, how am I going to teach these people what they need to learn if I can't even do it myself?
So Meredith is now in the position of trying to figure out what skills can she feasibly teach her trainees, given the political and legal context, and what skills do her students need to leave the state to learn? Like this year, she had one resident who wanted to focus on abortion care for her third-year elective.
We had a lot of conversations around, should she just stay in Cincinnati and do it with us? Should she look somewhere else? She's from the West Coast. Should she go back out there? And so it's been hard because a lot of the other places in protected access states are struggling to balance the influx of trainees. It definitely took calling up a friend and being like, hey, are you guys taking out-of-state residents? She's awesome, you know? But that to me is also really hard as an educator to say okay, well, I'll just send my residents out of state. I don't want to do that. I went into academics to be able to train trainees. And I went to fellowship to learn these skills to pass on to somebody else. And so then to have to say we'll just go to a different state, it makes me feel like a bad educator. It makes me feel like I'm letting my trainees down.
So beyond making training harder to access, Dobbs has also impacted the kinds of students that go to residency in places like Ohio. Restricted states are left mostly with students that are okay with not getting trained, leaving the state with fewer and fewer clinicians able to offer this care at all. Meanwhile, the students who do want that training end up vying for the extremely limited spots in unrestricted states like California and New York. There just aren't enough training spots for everyone who wants them. The impacts of this deficit can get pretty serious pretty fast.
So I had one of my grads, she did her training at our residency, and then she was doing an OB fellowship in Utah. And they had a young woman who was, I think, 16 or 17 weeks and had a preterm premature rupture of membranes. The bag of water broke, which is not compatible with that fetus surviving. It's too early. But she wasn't being given the option to have that pregnancy terminated. She was just waiting to see what would happen. And then she hemorrhaged and she was bleeding out in the hospital bed. And my resident was working alongside an OBGYN attending who had not had abortion training and felt like she could not do a D&C to save that woman. And so my resident had to step in and do it. And saved her life. She felt perfectly capable. She just did it. But it is really chilling to know that that scenario is going to become more and more prominent. And without good abortion training, people are not going to know how to do that. And that's going to have massive implications for women's health. And if our OBGYN residents are not getting that training and our family medicine docs are not getting that training, it's chilling.
It's like if you had a general surgeon and you said, okay, well, you can't do appendectomies. Like, you're going to only have to watch them virtually and read about them. But then when you're the attending doctor, there will probably be somebody who comes in and who will almost die from a ruptured appendicitis. And in that moment, you need to do that appendectomy. But maybe you only did 1 or 2 in an emergency situation as a resident, but still we expect you to have that skill. That's really scary, right? When you go to do those emergency procedures, whether it's an appendectomy, whether it's a septic abortion, you want to have done dozens, if not hundreds, before then, so that you're comfortable with a complicated case. I do think that by limiting what residents and medical students can learn, you are going to put patients at risk. I think you're also going to find that you're going to have a really bifurcated training map. And so you're going to have entire states that have people who can't even counsel a patient on an abortion or that option if they wanted it. And I think that's a sad reality because it's just part of reproductive health care and it's not going away.
Part of what makes this post-Dobbs reality so upsetting is that while the consequences of not having adequate access to training can be dire, the training itself is just not that difficult or time-consuming to complete.
A lot of places don't offer abortion every day, but let's say you were coming to a place that offered abortion every day. I think you could be trained to competency in a week or 2. It's not that hard. Early abortion, I'm not talking about second try. I'm just early abortion or manual vacuum aspiration. Yeah, a week, 2 weeks maybe.
Julie said that pre-Dobbs, she'd always seen the solution as making abortion training opt-out instead of opt-in at family medicine and OBGYN residency programs. That way, at least everyone would get basic training, unless they specifically opted out due to religious or moral objections.
I have found over the years that I am not very good at actually predicting who's going to be the ones that go on to provide. I don't think when you start residency, you don't really know what you want to do. And some people are really much more gung-ho, but then what they really end up caring about is living in San Francisco Bay Area, and there's plenty of providers in the Bay. So they're not necessarily going to be able to provide there. Whereas other people might not be that interested, but then they get trained and then they find themselves in rural North Carolina where nobody else is offering, and they're like, okay, I'm going to do this.
But since Dobbs, training has become such a limited resource that even making it opt-out in all the programs that remain wouldn't account for the thousands of residents in restricted states missing out on any training at all. So what's it like to be seeking training in such a divided landscape? We talked to a lot of trainees in the past year and a half, and one of the things that struck us most was how varied their considerations have to be. Not just what kinds of technical training the program offers now, but also the likelihood that'll stay the same, given the political context of the state. Even the culture and attitudes around abortion at the school have become a consideration. Anastasia Anazonwu is currently on the threshold of the critical jump between medical school and residency.
My name's Anastasia Anazonwu, and I am a third year, literally 2 weeks away from being fourth year medical student at the University of Missouri in Columbia. Currently, I'm very burnt out. So what I do in a day is focus on the next step, which is getting to residency.
Anastasia grew up in a very conservative Southern family that went to church twice a week. Her mom was once proudly arrested for protesting outside an abortion clinic. Abortion was a dirty word in her household growing up, she told us. But when Anastasia went to college in New York, everything changed. She began to question the beliefs she'd been raised with, and by the end, what she wanted more than anything else was to be an abortion provider.
So when I was applying and when I was thinking of how I would shape my mouth around, like, I want to do, what's the word? I didn't say the A word, right? Because I'm like, I gotta get any means necessary. Like, I have to get this training so I can get to the next step. So family planning is what I talked about a lot.
When she was applying to medical school, she was already living in Missouri and volunteering as an abortion clinic escort, helping patients get past protesters and inside the building. Despite the protesters, Missouri seemed like an okay place to learn how to be an abortion provider.
Washington University in the city of St. Louis has a medical school, and they had this group called Medical Students for Choice, and they came out to events sometimes, or sometimes they would organize groups of medical students to do clinic escorting as well. And I was just like, wow, look at them out here in a city where they could actually learn abortion care training. I thought at the time, I can start even learning about this as a medical student. I thought I'd have to learn about this as a resident.
So when Anastasia started med school at the University of Missouri, a couple hours away from St. Louis, she was hopeful.
I was like, oh my gosh, there's a Medical Students for Choice. This is going to be so exciting. And then it was just really bogged down. The folks who were working here were very, maybe understandably, hesitant to push boundaries or ruffle feathers or say the word abortion. And I was like, okay, cool, big bet. But out in St. Louis, they're fucking shit up. They're going to rallies. They're doing all these things. And I think it's just really timid.
Like she told us about this one time, the student group was putting on an abortion clinic documentary. They would show a screening, and then afterwards there would be a discussion.
So there was this discussion of okay, should we send this out to the entire class or just to people who have signed up to be on our listserv? And I was like, let's send it to the entire class. It's just a documentary that, 4 people show up to or not, just all the other documentaries. And I was like, no. For everyone's privacy, we should go ahead and just invite the people who are on the listserv. And I was like, okay, fine. And then we had this long discussion about, okay, should we get butcher paper to cover the windows and transparent doors so that people's privacy is protected, so that no one can walk by and say something ugly, or should we not? And I was like, no, we don't need to do that. We're not doing anything bad and we don't want to fight. But if someone comes into the space and picks a fight, that's a different story than us just existing and being.
Now Anastasia is considering where to go for residency training, and experiences like this loom large in her decision-making process.
In Central Missouri, at an institution that's affiliated with a state-funded, federally funded place, you can't say abortion to patients. Literally, it's all right, so you're pregnant. If that's a result that is upsetting to you, then maybe Google online where you could not be upset. Literally that kind of language. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You should maybe go to Planned Parenthood if you had questions about this pregnancy. That would really grind me down. I'd just be worried that this great passion that I think defines me, just because I'd be so exhausted and mentally worn down, I'd be worried that passion would leave me in exchange for a little bit more mental health, a little bit more peace with a situation. Oh my God. Oh, that's really I'm really scared about that shit.
If Anastasia were to stay at her current program in Central Missouri, she'd not only be navigating the cultural stigma around abortion training, but she'd also need to leave to get technical training in a less restricted state. So she talked to her advisor, Dr. Bhavik Kumar, one of the voices we heard in episode 2.
And he was like, don't do that. Like, go somewhere where you're celebrated, where you don't have to, where like everyone wants to get that training. Go somewhere where you don't have to say family planning when you mean to say abortion.
And so under the guidance of Dr. Kumar, Anastasia has decided to apply only to programs in states where they have abortion training easily available.
He's just like, I want to do abortions. I want to treat and care for Black, brown, and queer people. And I want to be in a place where I can just talk about abortions like the fucking regular ass medical procedure that it is. I'm going to go where I can actually learn it. And I'm like, if you're listening to this, Dr. Kumar, like, I'm just so grateful that he got me on that path, because that final, like, nudge is what's going to get me to this kid who said she wanted to be an abortion care provider at some point, maybe when I was 18. I'm, like, literally 10 years older now. You know, like, that's going to get me to actually being an abortion care provider.
So for Anastasia, whose top priority is to become an abortion provider no matter what it takes, leaving a restricted place like Missouri is the decision that makes the most sense. But for other people whose draw to abortion care is less clear-cut, the calculus around where to train and practice feels more complicated. Meet Bria Peacock.
So I'm Georgian through and through, like peaches, pecans, Georgia.
Bria's doing her OBGYN residency in California at UCSF, but Georgia is really where her heart is.
My family's from Cordele, Georgia, which is the watermelon capital of the world. That's our call to fame, which we have been in for 5 generations. So you know what that means, Black people in the South. Like those were our roots here and all that came with that. I come from a family of survivors. Of course, being out here in California, it's so interesting to and then even going to school in DC, seeing the impacts of the Western flight and the Northern flight after slavery, and just feeling a lot of sense of pride that my family stayed and survived after all of that in the South, which is the pride that I have and why I want to go back.
Her vision for what her life would be dedicated to, her mission, became really clear to her very young.
I was born and raised in Atlanta. Oh my God, the best city in the world, in my opinion, by a single mama. And my upbringing was very intentional, like getting me into a city, certain schools, moving, apartment to apartment so that I could have a chance. I grew up around teen moms as what do you call generational curse in my family, whatever you want to call that. I just understood very early what that meant. Everybody talks about adolescent pregnancy prevention, but what about when they do get pregnant? Why does the village go away? What are we doing as a society, and why are we failing these people, and why are they Black? Not just like, people hear, oh, I want to do stuff with my hands. Like, I was never that. What can I do to make the impact that I need to make? I want to work with teen moms, do abortions, and move back to Georgia. It's been the same.
But for now, she's at UCSF, getting the training she needs to be the abortion provider she wants to be.
What people are doing out here in the healthcare realm, in the advocacy realm, in the community realm, I couldn't get that back home. I can build it when I get there, though. But I really wanted to make sure that I got the groundwork, that I got the expertise, so that nothing falls through the cracks.
It isn't always easy, though, she says. She's getting the training she wants, but it can be hard to be so far from home. When Dobbs fell, the first thing she thought about, naturally, was Georgia.
Like, it's going to be very scary for my cousins, who might not have a car, might not have $300 to make it up to Atlanta. That was already a struggle. Now, what? I didn't have that sigh of relief that a lot of people had here because they knew that their communities were going to be protected in the state of California. I'm not from here. I bleed Georgia. And so I thought about home first.
Georgia has a 6-week ban, essentially eliminating abortion in the state. But even if she won't be able to practice abortions in Georgia, Bria says, her plan is still to go back.
My vision has never been within 4 walls of a clinic, within 4 walls of a hospital. I've never thought that way. That wasn't my vision for why I wanted to become a doctor, why I decided to be an abortion provider. It's all about the people. It will always be about the people. And so when you're from a community, there's a different kind of understanding that you have. And what I understand is the true impacts don't come from academic journals that we don't have access to. There's education piece, there's the community impact piece, there's a village piece, there's a policy piece. Like the medicine is a part of it, it's not all of it. They come from being in the community, and that's my goal.
Since Dobbs, almost half of the OBGYN residency programs in the country are in states with complete or partial bans, and only 40 of the country's almost 800 family medicine residencies offer integrated abortion training. During the Roe era, I think we took for granted that we could always train new generations of abortion providers. There was a hopefulness to that. Going forward, as current providers age out and approach retirement, it's not clear if there will be people there with the training they need to fill those shoes. If you're looking for ways to get involved, check out our website at thenocturnist.com. The Post-Roe America page has an advocacy toolkit with resources to help you get started. And next week, we look ahead to the future of abortion care. Where do we go from here? The Nocturnist Post-Roe America was created by me, Allie Block, and Emily Silverman. Our lead producer was Molly Rose Williams, and our producers were Sam Osborne and Jessica Young. John Oliver helped with the mixing, and Carly Besser assistant produced. Thanks to medical student producers Anjali Walia, Dahlia Kaki, Fiona Miller, and Milky Mahari, and pre-health intern Treya Tompkins. Our chief operating officer is Rebecca Groves. The series illustrations are by Nicole Zhu. The Nocturnist theme music is by Yosef Monroe, and all additional music comes from Blue Dot Sessions. The Nocturnist Post-Roe America series was made possible in part by the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation. The Nocturnist is supported by the California Medical Association, a physician-led organization that works tirelessly to make sure that the doctor-patient relationship remains at the center of medicine. To learn more about the CMA, visit cmadocs.org. Our show is also made possible with donations from listeners like you. Thank you for supporting our work in storytelling. If you enjoy our show, please follow us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. You can also help others find us by telling your friends and colleagues, posting this episode on social media, and leaving us a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. To contribute your voice to an upcoming project or to support our work with a donation, visit our website at thenocturnist.com. You can also find resources with more information about the state of abortion in the U.S., as well as ways to advocate and get involved at the series website. I'm your host, Allie Block. See you next week.